Collusion is one of the biggest negative side effects of having a free-for-all environment in a game where you can have direct interaction with other players.
Distraction makers.
So there's been this trend that we have noticed that competitive games have been trending towards free-for-all formats. I don't know exactly, I don't really know how to explain it, but I'm not sure that really matters that much.
Yeah.
I have some ideas as to why that's the case.
All sorts of different reasons, but we'd be speculating.
But we've seen this trend through, I mean, even at least the last, I don't know, decade or so, where we've gone from 1v1 being the primary means of competition to team-based with something like League of Legends to now sort of a free-for-all format like Fortnite. And Magic has sort of gone through these changes as well. We see Commander becoming sort of the premier format instead of 1v1 standard. And Commander is even starting to push into a more competitive format in cEDH. We've seen that popularity rise over the last couple of years.
Before we get into today's topic, if you like our videos, please give us a little like and subscribe. Also, I have a Kickstarter coming. August 15th is when it launches. You can find the link down below to go to the Kickstarter, and if you want to support me, you can get one of the playmats, or you can get all 5 of the playmats.
I think it's interesting, but also a little concerning, mainly because, this is something Richard Garfield talks about in characteristics of games, and he talks about what happens when you have more than 2 sides in a game.
Yeah.
And how complicated it becomes in order to create an environment that is fair and mostly fair,
right?
But functional even.
There's a graph that he uses that I'm not sure how data-driven the graph is or if it's just used as a visual example, but basically shows that at a certain point, the amount of direct interaction that you have as a player in a free-for-all format, the politics of your decision-making overwhelms the skill and what you get out of the effect of your skill in a game.
Right, and then that sort of brings up the question of what are we actually trying to do in a competitive environment?
Right.
So what I think we should talk about a little bit is some of the potential future pitfalls of cEDH, things that the format will have to address and potentially work through to become a viable competitive format. Even recently, Wizards of the Coast had basically pointed to, hey, this might be a future format for us. Yeah. Talking to tournament organizers and things.
So I think where we can start is we can look at other games that are starting to get into this competitive field. Other games that have decided, all right, there's a large amount of interest. And this is what's happening with cEDH, right? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people that are like, I love this game. I want to be really good at it. And I want money for playing this competitively. And I want to see it recognized.
Yeah, and I think that's like a viable thing, right? Yeah. Like people who are like, if enough popularity of a thing occurs, there's going to be people that want to be better at it and want to achieve as part of their sort of player psychographic.
Right. But I think if we look at these other games, not that long ago, I think it was about 2020, Fortnite, for instance, had a major crackdown on Collusion. Collusion is probably one of the biggest negative side effects of having a free-for-all environment in a game where you can have direct interaction with other players. And Fortnite's solution to this, essentially, was the big problem was that players, what they would do in Fortnite is they would go up to other players, and because they couldn't communicate with them, they would either emote or swing their axe or do some sort of an action in the game to indicate to that other player that they don't want to fight them. Instead, they're going to work together. The player didn't have to accept, but if we look at let's say maybe Prisoner's Dilemma or something like that, it benefits them to probably accept and move forward with this, especially early on in the game when there's not loot to take from this person. And so Fortnite basically cracked down and they said, no more moving. Right, yeah. Like, no more crouching, no more. If you look like you're crouching to tell someone, we're going to get you.
Yep.
And because that's all they can do. Really, like when it comes to collusion, other than maybe being able to have some sort of an investigation prior to the tournament, you have no evidence that person is going to be colluding with other players or how they're going to be colluding. It's going to be told through different messages that players are going to learn, and once a system is built in to say, oh, well, if you scratch your nose like this or whatever, then we'll know you're cheating. Then players are going to be like, okay, well, I'll do this. And then they're going to be like, well, he wasn't scratching his nose, so.
Well, and even Fortnite, right? Basically, the policy ended up coming down to if you see something, say something, right? And it's like, okay, well, now you've just created an incentive structure for someone to sort of tattle on another player whether they did something or not.
Right.
And so the sort of rules enforcement of this breaks down very rapidly. And this is even something that we do see a bit in 1v1 Magic. There's actually been a pretty recent crackdown in 1v1 Magic in terms of colluding to split prize pools, or throw matches or whatever it is. And if you sort of show up to a tournament with enough people with you that are willing to collude with you, you're much more likely to win the tournament. This was another issue with people trying to get their invite to the Pro Tour, is you would have players who already had their invites to the Pro Tour continuing to play in tournaments with their friends that hadn't, so that they could concede to them so that they could try to get them their invite. That's just one example of this happening. So it's not that this problem isn't an issue in 1v1, but what becomes much harder to identify in a multiplayer game environment is that it's very difficult to tell the difference between an act of collusion and just a game action. Right. And so, we hear a lot that sort of some of the criticism of cEDH is more that like, oh, the rule structure makes it so it's less competitive, and the fact that it's a multiplayer format and there's kingmaking is a problem. It's like, yeah, those are issues, but collusion is like the top tier problem in a free-for-all multiplayer environment.
Right. There's all sorts of weird systems things that we've talked about many times. Like you said, kingmaking, we talked about the bystanding problem, all these sorts of things that are definitely parts of the system of the game. But this is extending outside of the game because there's a new objective. It's not just about winning the game, it's about winning prize money. And
so when we look at like why multiplayer games potentially might be more interesting and attractive to players, one of the things that we see is like when we look at, say, something like tennis or golf or these games that are more like, segmented. Golf's kind of a free-for-all sort of, but like you just play one at a time. It's more like a race or something. Yeah, you
have no direct interaction.
So there's no direct interaction. But let's take tennis because I think that's a better one-to-one example, where you have one person and another person on this, clear two sides of a conflict, but there's only one person on each side. And so it ends up being a very sort of skill testing game in that it's up to the single individual as to whether you win or lose. Where when we compare it to something like basketball or American football, you have a lot more people on either side, right? So there's a lot more opportunities for somebody to make a mistake and create a window for the opposing team. And so you just have a lot more opportunities for variance to open doors to the opponents. Right. And so that, I think, is when we would look at something like League of Legends does this well. Same kind of thing, right? You have clear two sides, but there's more than one person on each side.
Yeah, I think Counter-Strike sort of popularized the team deathmatch approach. Yeah. It wasn't the first one to do it, but it definitely popularized it in esports. However, the asymmetry of heroes in League of Legends, I think, just made it that much more exciting to watch, because it wasn't just watching the same people with maybe just a different sort of kit of guns or whatever interact with each other, who's better at shooting the other people. Instead, now there's all these heroes you could play, and you don't know what the heroes are going to be and how they're going to be matched up and all of that.
Right, and League, to its credit, has even created a pretty interesting system in terms of like being able to ban heroes from the opposing team and things to try to limit some like if they had made a design mistake and made a hero too powerful, they have a mechanism to try to alleviate that issue. So we sort of see the evolution over time as we move further and further towards open-ended multiplayer formats. Part of the reason, sort of psychologically, why we might see this is that it gives it takes a little bit of pressure off of you as an individual player, right? In that, something like StarCraft, which is very intense 1v1 competitive environment. If you make a mistake, it's 100% your fault. There's nobody to point the finger at. In say League of Legends, I think probably potentially adding to some of the toxicity of the game, you get the finger pointed constantly at someone else.
At the same time, you also have this opportunity for other people to carry you.
Right.
So like you could maybe have messed up, but someone else could have done something really good in order to make up for that. Which again, it creates those moments where like in 1v1 StarCraft, if you mess up, it's only one bad thing that's going to happen, right? Like one other person's going to attack you. But in a 5v5 situation, one person messes up and the enemy team capitalizes on it, but then one of your guys does something really good, and it creates even more variance in the outcomes.
Right, for sure. Obviously, competitive Fortnite is a thing, and people are interested in watching it, interested in playing it.
Yeah.
I do wonder about its sustainability. Like, we don't really see any kind of professional sports that have a free-for-all environment.
We finally found one.
Yeah.
We were talked about it on Discord. What's the
a sport?
Yeah, polo?
Oh.
Crochet or croquet.
Crochet. Yeah, competitive crocheting.
Yeah. No, croquet.
Yeah, but it also has a little bit of limited interaction.
Yeah.
And it's also sort of turn-based. But yeah, croquet.
Croquet is probably the closest that we've found.
And I don't know if it's a professional sport, but
it's close.
Yeah. In some ways, it's a little similar to golf, except you can hit there is some interaction.
Right. You can hit other people's balls, essentially.
Right. And one thing, if we're looking at croquet, which is kind of interesting, in that the players in the game you kind of end up segmented, right? In that players whose balls are closer together are more likely to be able to hit their opponents. And then so you sort of separate yourselves into kind of like little 1v1s potentially.
Yeah.
The other one, actually now I'm thinking about it, is NASCAR. NASCAR is a free-for-all environment, but it's a race.
Right.
There is direct interaction, kind of. But I think they're trying to avoid it, but
but it's not as we talk about this a little bit in our Kingmaking video, that like the way you get around a free-for-all format with direct interaction is you limit who you can directly interact with.
Do we think that cEDH could ever be a viable format, or what kinds of changes would need to occur for it to become viable?
Right. I mean, the only change is you'd have to adjust the system in some way, because unlike something like NASCAR or unlike something like croquet or these other sports that they do have free-for-all with direct interaction, you are not limited to who you can directly interact with at a systemic level. Goading, the Monarch, any of these things, these are mechanic changes to the game's format that sort of do what these other free-for-all competitive games do, but it is not there at a base level.
Yeah.
You can directly target whoever you want at any point in time in the game, meaning that collusion is a complete possibility.
Yeah, and this is why you see a lot of games try to limit potential interaction points, right? Where it's like, oh, you can only attack the person to your left or something.
Yeah.
And the game where the Monarch comes from, another Richard Garfield game, Vampire Bloodlines,
something like that.
Yeah. Which the mechanic called the edge, but that's essentially where that came from. You can only attack, I think, the person to your right,
to the left,
or to the left. One of the two people next to you, they're effectively like your prey or something. And so we see these sort of like limits to interaction. I think at first and foremost to limit kingmaking, but by doing so, I think you're also helping to alleviate some of the collusion that can occur. So competitive poker is another thing that we should address a little bit, because this is a problem in poker, is that collusion is against the rules, but also still happens.
Yeah.
Poker has, again, it limits direct interaction in some ways, but there's really nothing stopping a player from signaling that they have a good hand or not to their person that they're colluding with at the table.
Assuming they want to take the risk of, possibly being caught. But again, it's like, do you have the evidence, right? If someone does this, like, is that enough for you to be like, okay, that's collusion,
Well, boy, your ear's awful itchy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right. So I don't know, I guess to wrap it up, what's the takeaways here? What's the lesson?
It's probably not going to work, buddy. The reason that we even wanted to make this video is because what we foresee happening is cEDH is an inevitability.
Yes.
It's going to happen. The demand for it is too high. The amount of players that are invested in Commander are too great.
Yeah.
It's, I think, small at the moment, but I think the minute that Magic it's growing larger, and I think the minute that a Magic officially creates a competitive format and has it on all of its social media and on Twitch and all that,
has a prize pool.
It has a prize pool. It's going to do very, very well. And I think a lot of people are going to be interested in it. So it's going to happen. But I think what's also going to happen a couple years afterwards is, or right away,
Probably
Magic is going to be saying, hey guys,
don't do this.
Don't do this, or you're in trouble if we catch you.
And I think, if you're somebody who wants to play cEDH or does already, this is definitely something to be aware of.
And to do. Yeah.
Sure, if you want to win. Yeah, unfortunately, that's where we're at.
Do it, but just don't get caught, and then you'll be good.
Yeah, it is. It's something that is particularly hard to enforce, particularly hard to spot. So be aware that it's happening, and do what you can, because it's what it is.